We are truly honored to have with us tonight Dr. Riordan, the Adelaide and Allen Bird Professor of History at the University of Maine. He received his undergraduate BA in History at the University of California, Berkeley, and his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. He was a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Glasgow in 2012. Dr. Riordan is an early American historian and author, specializing in the Revolutionary era. He has been a faculty member at the University of Maine since 1997. Beginning in 2019, he has done considerable public history work to commemorate the bicentennial of the state of Maine, for which he has received several awards, including from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Outstanding Faculty Member Award for service and outreach. He currently serves on the City of Bangor's Historic Preservation Commission and is active in National History Day of Maine, part of a national research program for students in grades 6 through 12. Dr. Riordan.
Well, thank you all so much for coming out. It is such an odd time in our history of mask wearing and uncertainty about things, and it certainly disrupted our bicentennial commemoration in Maine. So the upside maybe is that I've gotten to continue talking about the statehood process beyond the year 2020. So thanks to all of you for coming out. You know, one of the things that is most important to me about the bicentennial, you know, it's a funny thing, a bicentennial, just that accident of a number that we have 10 fingers, so we count by decades, we count by centuries. So it's not the number 200 that matters, but what is in a commemoration like this for me is the opportunity it provides for academic historians and the broader public that loves history to come closer together to share our passion. And I think all these things sort of go through cycles, but I think in the 20 plus years that I've been at UMaine, the sort of academic community and the popular public history community has been too far apart. And I do think we're at a time of growing public interest about the past, and of course it's always kept alive in the history rooms of local libraries and genealogical societies and committees that maintain local cemeteries. But I really am hopeful that the bicentennial of Maine's statehood is an opportunity for us to strengthen the sorts of connections that we should have between history departments at colleges and universities across the state and institutions like the Surrey Historical Society. So I really want to thank John for being so persistent in getting me here over the course of the last 2 years. It's really no hardship since I have a camp on Toddy Pond, so I did not have to travel very far tonight. And it was an excuse for me to dig a bit into Surrey history, something I had not looked at closely before, and share a little bit of that with you as part of the talk tonight. So I start my talk with this image on the screen, which I think is the most recognizable visual symbol of the bicentennial. This is the commemorative license plate that the state issued, that those of us who were willing to pony up $25 or whatever it was could put it on our front bumper, get rid of that boring old license plate for a while, and celebrate or show off our interest in statehood that way. And part of what I like about this image is that I think it poses a really essential question for us about 1820 and 2020. How do they resonate with one another? Right? That's a long time ago. Do they have any meaningful connection with one another across such a long period of time. And, not surprisingly, as an early American historian, my argument is that, yes, they do have really essential sorts of connections. And I think that we, in 2021, in an extremely polarized time in American public life, that we can really improve our circumstances in the present and plan for the future better by having a stronger sense of our relatively distant past. That this is something that we share, that we can improve our civic skills and knowledge by understanding the past in a richer and fuller way. And the last thing I'll add about that is that I think that in many ways, history's ultimate lesson is of humility. Because there is always so much to learn about the past. And part of what is so exciting about the past is that it is not frozen and unchanging. Our relationship to the past is really about what are the questions that we are asking about it that we need to understand so that our lives today have better direction. So I think something like a bicentennial gives us a great opportunity for that sort of reflection, and I'm really thrilled to have all of you here tonight to hear some of my comments about the statehood era, this long process by which Maine separated from Massachusetts, and how we might understand that in a particular way from our vantage point now 201 years after statehood. So I'll start with the basic facts of Maine's statehood. Maine does have an official birthday, right? March 15th, 1820 was the day that the federal government officially recognized Maine as a separate state from Massachusetts. So we became the 23rd state in the U.S. that spring, maybe late winter day in 1820. And I've paired it with what I like to think of as the first official map of the state of Maine by an incredible Maine cartographer by the name of Moses Greenleaf. And I've been told it wasn't actually an official map. It's not really, it wasn't issued by the state. But this came out in 1820 and was the sort of map maker making a statement about Maine as an entity distinct from Massachusetts. And I'm going to come back to another map by Moses Greenleaf a little bit later in the talk and say a little bit more about this fascinating person. The last thing I'll say about this is just a quick plug for the Osher Map Library, which is a public, rare map archive at the University of Southern Maine. It is really an international caliber repository of maps. It obviously has very strong Maine collections, but they have Renaissance maps and medieval maps, and it's a public institution. They've digitized a lot of their material and made it available online. So if you're a history buff and you like maps, you should, at the very least, check out the Osher Map Library online and then go visit their gallery space the next time you're in Portland. So my talk tonight is organized around three connections between the statehood era, which is a long period of time. I count the statehood era as starting in the 1780s and coming to a close by the 1820s. So three connections between that statehood era and contemporary Maine today. And what I find fascinating is that these particular themes that I'm going to talk about were each of them absolutely front and center in Maine of the statehood era. that people talked about these issues, they disagreed about these issues, they battled over these issues, they were mostly unresolved. And all three of them we will hear, and we will say, oh, that is true about the United States and Maine as well in 2021 as well. Now, what I really find intriguing about history is thinking about the relationship between certain aspects of the human condition that endure, that are with us continually, and in some senses do not change, while also being aware that a great deal does change. So I'm making an argument about these three past-present connections, and we will recognize them as themes that are familiar to us in our daily life. But I am not saying that things remain exactly the same, but these remain ways in which we can understand our own moment better by having a fuller historical understanding. So this is the point where I set my timer, because I can really go on at too great a length. And my goal is to wrap up my 3 points in no more than 45 minutes, and then I'm very happy to take questions, go back, look at slides again, whatever you like. I also am really happy to take questions during my talk. So I think a lot of times you'll have something you want to know about, but if you don't ask it, by the time I get another 30 minutes down the road, you won't remember, or worse yet, you'll be so exhausted you just want to get out of here. So if you have a question as I'm going, put your hand up. I will notice. I'll kind of finish the point I'm making, and I'll take a question or two, and then we'll go back. So we can do questions at the end and in the middle. I'm delighted to stop and catch my breath. So the first of my 3 past-present connections takes up the single most famous dimension of Maine's statehood. One that most people are familiar with, but it's a complicated issue, and I have to confess, I really did not understand this issue until I began to do the work to prepare this kind of talk about Maine's statehood. So I'm pretty sure that the most famous and the most confusing aspect of Maine becoming a state is that it somehow is related to slavery. And this is a puzzle, right? How could it be that this northernmost New England state could have been absolutely at the crossroads of the most explosive moment of issues of slavery and blackness entering national political culture in U.S. history up until this point. So what I have here is of my image is a sort of classic map that is in just about every high school and college textbook. And you'll see in the bottom here, the map is titled The Missouri Compromise. And at the very first of these sorts of public talks I gave, at this point, a woman's hand shot up, and she was really angry, and she said, when I was in school, we called this the Maine-Missouri Compromise. Why is it only called the Missouri Compromise? I chuckled, and I thought, well, it is true that both were involved. We should have Maine in there as well. But as I did more research and came to understand this event better, I realized there was a second real shortcoming with this image and how this event is generally understood. And that really hinges on the word compromise. How was this national crisis over slavery addressed through this particular piece of congressional bargaining and negotiating? And so to understand that, we have to take one of our first steps a bit deeper into the political machinations of the Maine statehood process. So by the end of 2019, the Maine public and the Massachusetts legislature had agreed that Maine should become a separate independent state from Massachusetts. 1819, December of 1819.
Yeah, 2019.
Thank you. So the past and present get mixed up in my mind a lot. So in December of 1819, the representatives of the District of Maine sent a petition to the U.S. Congress applying for admission to the Union as an independent state. And this petition arrived in Congress and faced immediate problems because, lo and behold, the U.S. Congress did not function very well. And they had been deadlocked for over a year in this irreconcilable difference about to do with a previous petition that had arrived from the Missouri Territory. And the House of Representatives had passed a law that said, well, yes, Missouri, you can become a state, but if you become a state, you cannot do so with slavery as a legal institution. When that bill went to the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Senate refused to pass it. So the House and the Senate, since February, had been locked in this deep disagreement. December comes, the application comes from Maine, and right away, one of the congressmen from, well, he was a Massachusetts congressman, but he lived in Phippsburg. He represented a district in modern-day Maine. And Mark Langdon Hill wrote a letter right away to William King, who was sort of the major political figure pressing for Maine independence. And William King will, of course, be the first governor of the state in a little bit. And Hill wrote from D.C. that month of December to warn that all Maine members of Congress needed to act very carefully and to, quote, say nothing against the wishes of the Southern people. And he added a P.S. in his letter. He said, I hope the people of Maine will remain still on the slave question. So Hill is recommending from D.C. to William King in Bath, let's support the southern wing of our party. Let's not raise issues about slavery that are going to be problematic. And if we're lucky, Maine can slip through this statehood process. Now, William King was in a really interesting situation. He was a man who had been raised in Scarborough, and his stepbrother, Rufus King, was a U.S. Senator from New York and was one of the leaders of the anti-slavery movement in the Senate. So you might think that William King would follow his brother's lead and write back to Hill and say, no, we're not going to kind of duck this issue. But that's not what happened. King has a little bit of indecision about what to do, but he pretty quickly decides that Mark Langdon Hill and another one of the U.S. congressmen from Maine, a guy named John Holmes, that it's going to be better if they avoid raising anti-slavery issues and hope that Maine can sort of run the gauntlet and achieve statehood by not confronting this issue, but by ducking and hiding for cover. Yeah?
Is William King related to Angus King?
I do not believe so. I've looked through that a little bit. I thought it would be a good match, but I think Angus is connections to Maine are more recent. So this issue of what to do with Missouri was, I don't think I can really overstate how much this had public attention in the day. And I've got a great passage from the major Portland paper of this period, the Eastern Argus, just a couple of weeks after that Hill letter, sort of reporting on developments in Washington, D.C. And I think they give a nice sense of just how difficult this issue was. So the paper reported, the debate on the Missouri question has at length commenced in the Senate, and it absorbs so much attention that until it is indefinitely settled, it may almost be said that no other business will be done in Congress. Never were the galleries and lobbies more crowded. So what is Congress going to do, and the House of Representatives in particular, to try to move the public affairs of the day forward? And the leader of this is the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, sort of famous American politician of this era, who was from Kentucky, so sort of a similar border state to Missouri with a similar kind of pro-slavery but not completely dominated by slavery understanding of that particular region. And Clay put together a whole series of bills that were not formally one package together, but everybody sort of knew that they would all work together, and this was the way that he hoped to get around this issue. And so on the key vote in this package that Clay put together, the Congress agreed not to prohibit slavery in Missouri. So this is a reversal of their position in the beginning of 1819. And it passes the House of Representatives by just 3 votes, 90 to 87. Now, what is particularly interesting is what did the U.S. Congressman from Maine do on this particular piece of legislation? And what is kind of amazing is that the District of Maine in the Congress in 1820 had 7 U.S. congressmen. So we weren't even a state, and we've got, triple the number of congressmen that we have today. And the majority of the Maine congressmen voted to oppose allowing Missouri's entrance as a slave state. Right? So 2 congressmen were in the minority. One was that guy, Mark Langdon Hill, who wrote the initial letter, and the other was a man named John Holmes from Alfred, Maine, who will go on to become a very influential politician in Maine. If those 2 Maine congressmen had voted with the majority of their district delegation, then slavery would not have been permitted in the new state of Missouri. Now, what's interesting, then as now, when congressmen have to make a public stand on a difficult issue that's coming down to such a tight vote, they feel compelled to explain why they took the stand that they did to their constituents. So we've got a newspaper article that was co-authored by 4 of those who voted in opposition, and then we've got a response from one of the 2 who voted in favor of allowing slavery in Missouri. And I want to read a little bit from this joint letter that appeared in the Portland Gazette in March of 1820, where these majority Maine congressmen who had lost in the larger vote in the House of Representatives, how they explained to their constituents why they took the stand that they did, knowing that this could, if they were successful, it would derail this coupling of Maine and Missouri's admission as states that Henry Clay had brokered in his position as Speaker of the House. So these 4 congressional newspaper writers explained that it was abhorrent to their notions of the rights of man and humanity to support the expansion of slavery in the United States. And they were particularly worried that slave power would corrupt Republican government if they did not take the sort of stand that they did. And then they cautioned their readers that it would be a falsehood to call this a compromise. We utterly protest against and refuse to sanction this with our approbation. So that is my second, more serious problem with thinking about this event as the Maine, Missouri Compromise. Right? These congressional delegates explicitly said at the time, this is not a compromise, this was forced upon us against our will, and we think this is a real disaster for the future of the Republic. So the closing point I want to make about this first past-present connection is that it shows the deep, deep place of blackness and slavery in American political life, right? It is a very pressing issue in Maine and the US in 2021. It was absolutely a huge public issue in Maine of 1820 and 1821. And this is